A single silver dollar hit the muddy boardwalk with a dull thud. The mining town of Oakhaven fell dead silent. They thought this scarred, terrifying mountain man was buying a frail, broken girl for a cruel end. They were dead wrong. What happened on that mountain changed the frontier forever. The winter of 1,878 inches, the Colorado Territory, was brutal enough to freeze a man's blood in his veins. But the chill in the air on that bleak Tuesday morning had nothing to do with the weather. Outside Miller's Provisionary, the mud of Oakhaven's main street was churned by the boots of greedy men and desperate prospectors. Standing on the back of a splintered buckboard wagon was Jebediah Higgins, a man whose soul was as foul as his tobacco-stained teeth. Beside him, shivering in a threadbare cotton dress that offered no protection against the biting wind, was his niece, Abigail. Abigail was 19, but malnutrition and relentless abuse made her look like a fragile child. Her cheek was bruised, a deep, mottled purple, and a pronounced limp from an improperly healed childhood fracture forced her to lean heavily against the wooden railing of the wagon. To the ruthless men of Oakhaven, a frontier town built on gold dust and cruelty, a woman was only as valuable as the labor she could provide. A girl who couldn't scrub floors, carry heavy pails of water, or endure the harsh physical demands of the West was deemed nothing more than a burden. "Look at her," Jebediah spat, holding up a lantern so the gray morning light caught her pale, terrified face. "I ain't feeding this useless stray no more. My brother owed me a debt when he died, and this crippled thing is the only asset he left behind. Who'll take her off my hands? I'll take $5. The crowd erupted into cruel laughter. $5? I wouldn't give you 5 cents for a broken plow, let alone a broken girl," shouted a drunk from the steps of the Rusty Spur Saloon. "She looks like she'll catch her death before nightfall, Jeb," sneered Bartholomew Caldwell, the town's wealthiest and most ruthless land baron. Caldwell stood wrapped in a beaver pelt coat, his eyes cold and calculating. "I'll give you a dime, Jebediah. Throw her in the stables with the hogs. She might be good for mucking stalls until the consumption takes her." Abigail closed her eyes, hot tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. She prayed for the cold to just take her right then and there. She had accepted her fate. She was entirely, utterly worthless to the world. Then, the murmuring of the crowd suddenly died. The heavy, oppressive silence was broken only by the crunch of heavy boots on the frozen mud. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, men instinctively stepping back, their hands hovering near the revolvers at their hips. Emerging from the morning mist was Silas Montgomery. The town called him the Beast of Blackwood Ridge. Standing over 6'3", broad-shouldered, and draped in the heavy hide of a grizzly bear, Silas was a terrifying figure. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jawbone, disappearing into a thick, untamed beard. He lived high up on the treacherous peaks, a solitary phantom who only came down to Oakhaven twice a year to trade pelts for coffee and salt. Rumors swirled that he was a murderer, an outlaw hiding from the hangman's noose, a savage who survived by eating raw meat. Silas stopped in front of the wagon, his dark, piercing eyes locked onto Abigail. She trembled under his gaze, certain that the devil himself had come to claim her. He didn't speak to Jebediah. He didn't acknowledge the trembling crowd. Silas reached into the leather pouch at his belt, pulled out a heavy Morgan silver dollar, and tossed it onto the wooden planks at Jebediah's feet. $1? Silas's voice was a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the chests of the men standing nearby. For the girl, Jebediah stared at the silver coin, then at the towering mountain man, swallowing hard. "Now, hold on a minute, Montgomery. I said 5. Silas took one step forward, placing a massive hand on the handle of the hunting knife strapped to his thigh. "I said, $1. "Sold," Jebediah squeaked, scrambling to snatch the coin from the wagon floor. Silas reached up. He didn't grab Abigail roughly like the men in town would have. Instead, he offered a massive calloused palm. Abigail stared at it, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. With no other choice, she placed her small, trembling hand in his. He effortlessly lifted her down from the wagon, wrapping a thick woolen blanket from his pack around her shivering shoulders. "Walk," was all he said. As they left Oakhaven, heading toward the imposing shadow of Blackwood Ridge, whispers broke out behind them. "God rest her soul," a woman muttered. "The beast will have her dead and buried in the snow before sundown." The journey up the mountain was agonizing. The incline was steep, and the snow was knee-deep in places. Abigail's bad legs screamed in pain, and her lungs burned with the thin, freezing air. She fully expected Silas to leave her behind when she stumbled, or to strike her for slowing him down, as her uncle always had, but he didn't. When her foot caught on a hidden root, and she collapsed into a snowbank, crying silently into the frost, Silas stopped. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable behind the scars and beard. Without a single word, he walked back, scooped her up into his massive arms as easily as if she were a bundle of kindling, and carried her the rest of the way up the mountain. By the time they reached the cabin, Abigail was burning with a terrible fever. The exposure, the stress, and her already weakened constitution had broken her. She drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of a heavy oak door opening, the smell of wood smoke, and being laid onto a bed that felt unimaginably soft. When Abigail finally opened her eyes with a clear mind, she expected to find herself in a dark, squalid cave, surrounded by animal bones. Instead, she blinked against the warm golden light of a crackling hearth. The cabin was a fortress of hand-hewn cedar, but inside, it was a sanctuary. The floors were swept clean and covered in woven rugs. The walls were lined not with traps and weapons, but with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound volumes. A brass kerosene lamp illuminated a sturdy oak table covered in intricate, hand-drawn maps and what looked like medical instruments. "Drink this." Abigail jumped. Silas was standing near the fire, holding a tin cup. He wore a clean flannel shirt, his wild hair tied back with a leather thong. Without the heavy bare hide, he looked less like a monster and more like a weary, solitary man. She shrank back against the pillows. "Please, don't hurt me." Silas sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. He placed the cup on the bedside table and took 3 steps back, giving her space. "It's willow bark and pine needle tea. It will break the rest of your fever." "You've been asleep for 2 days, Abigail." She stared at him, stunned. He knew her name, and his voice, it lacked the crude, uneducated drawl of the townspeople. He spoke with quiet authority, his enunciation sharp and refined. "Why did you buy me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't work. I can't lift heavy things. My leg. I'm worthless." Silas's jaw tightened. "Only a fool assigns a price to a human soul. I bought you because if I left you with that swine in Oakhaven, you would be dead by Friday. Drink the tea." Over the next week, the terrifying beast of Blackwood Ridge proved to be anything but. He didn't ask her to clean, nor did he lay a hand on her. He changed her bandages, fed her hearty venison stews, and spent his evenings reading quietly by the fire. As Abigail regained her strength, her curiosity overcame her fear. One afternoon, while Silas was out chopping wood, she approached his desk. She opened a large, leather-bound journal. The handwriting was elegant, filled with complex anatomical sketches and notes on diseases. On the inside cover, stamped in gold leaf, was a name: Dr. Silas Montgomery, Massachusetts General Hospital, Boston. "I was a surgeon," a voice said from the doorway. Abigail gasped and slammed the book shut, expecting his rage. But Silas only brushed the snow from his boots and walked over, his eyes filled with a haunting sadness. 5 years ago," Silas continued softly, staring into the fire, "I came west with my wife, Sarah. We wanted to build a clinic for the mining camps. We settled near a booming claim owned by a man named Bartholomew Caldwell." Abigail recognized the name immediately, the wealthy baron who had mocked her at the auction. "There was an outbreak of cholera in Caldwell's camp." Silas's voice hardened. "Caldwell refused to halt operations or buy clean water. When the men started dying, he needed a scapegoat to stop a miners' revolt. He blamed me. Said my Eastern medicines were poisoning them. He rallied a drunken mob one night. They burned our clinic to the ground." Silas turned his scarred face toward her. I barely got out. Sarah didn't. I dragged myself up this mountain to die. But the mountain wouldn't take me. So, I stayed. Let them think I'm a monster. It keeps them away. Abigail felt tears pricking her eyes. The man the town reviled as a savage was a healer who had lost everything to the very people who judged him. "I'm so sorry, Silas," she whispered. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the ice in his eyes seemed to thaw just a fraction. "We are both ghosts to the world down there, Abigail. But you don't have to be a ghost up here." A bond forged in shared trauma began to blossom. Silas taught Abigail how to read the complex medical texts, discovering she had a brilliant, absorbent mind. Abigail, in turn, brought warmth back to the cold cabin, mending his torn clothes and forcing him to smile with her surprisingly sharp wit. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. She felt seen. But the past is a relentless bloodhound. One evening, while Abigail was sorting through her small satchel of meager belongings, the only things her uncle had allowed her to keep a false bottom in the leather bag gave way. A folded, yellowed piece of heavy parchment fell onto the floor. Silas picked it up. As he unfolded it, his eyes widened in shock. "Abigail, where did you get this?" "It belonged to my father," she said, confused. "He told me to keep it hidden before he died. Uncle Jebediah never knew it was there." Silas laid the paper on the table. It was an official United States government land patent. "This isn't just a piece of paper, Abby. This is the deed to the Silver Tear claim. It's located right at the base of Blackwood Ridge." Abigail frowned. "Is it valuable?" "Valuable?" Silas ran a hand through his hair. "Caldwell has been tearing up the lower valley for 3 years, trying to find the primary vein of the Silver Tear. He's making millions off the runoff. But this proves the land, the whole mother lode, rightfully belongs to the Preston family. It belongs to you." Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place for Abigail. The cruel uncle, the sudden lack of funds, the haste to get rid of her. "Caldwell paid my uncle," she breathed, horror dawning on her. "He paid Jebediah to get rid of me so there would be no living Preston heir to challenge him for the land." Before Silas could answer, a sharp, unnatural sound echoed through the valley below. Crack. It was the distant, but distinct sound of a Winchester rifle. Silas rushed to the window, pulling back the heavy wool curtain. Down the mountain, winding up the treacherous snowy path, was a line of orange torches. Men on horseback. Bartholomew Caldwell hadn't just mocked Abigail at the auction. He had recognized her. And once he realized the beast hadn't killed her, but was harboring the one girl who could destroy his empire, he had assembled an army. Silas turned back to Abigail, his jaw set in stone, slipping his massive revolver from its holster. The beast of Blackwood Ridge was about to be unleashed, and this time, he had something worth dying for. The heavy silence of the mountain was shattered by a second gunshot, the bullet splintering the cedar frame of the cabin's front window. Glass rained down against the floorboards, reflecting the dying embers of the hearth. Silas moved with a predatory grace that betrayed his massive size. He instantly blew out the kerosene lamp, plunging the cabin into heavy shadows. In the sudden darkness, the orange glow of the approaching torches outside painted flickering, demonic shapes against the walls. "Get to the root cellar, Abigail," Silas commanded, his voice a low, urgent rasp. He strode to a heavy wooden chest at the foot of his bed, throwing open the lid to reveal a lever-action Winchester rifle and a bandolier of heavy cartridges. "Lock the trapdoor from the inside, and do not make a sound, no matter what you hear up here." Abigail's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Fear, cold, and familiar, threatened to paralyze her. This was the moment she had always dreaded, the moment violent men came to exact their cruelty. She looked at the heavy iron ring of the cellar door set into the floorboards. She could hide. She could cower in the dark like she had her entire life. But as she looked at Silas, the man who had bought her life for a single silver dollar, who had treated her with nothing but gentle dignity, a foreign feeling sparked within her chest. It was defiance. "No," Abigail said. Her voice shook, but she did not move toward the cellar. Silas paused. the brass cartridges gleaming in the dim light as he loaded the rifle. "Abigail, this is not a negotiation. Caldwell has at least a dozen men with him. They are ruthless, paid killers from the mining camps. And they are here for me," she replied, stepping away from the wall. She walked to his medical desk, her hands trembling as she picked up a heavy, cast-iron mortar used for grinding herbs. "I have spent 19 years letting men like my uncle and Bartholomew Caldwell dictate whether I live or die. I am done hiding in the dark, Silas. Tell me what to do." For a fraction of a second, surprise flashed across the mountain man's scarred face. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched upward into a grim, approving smile. He reached into his boot, withdrew a smaller, silver-plated derringer, and placed it on the table in front of her. "Keep away from the windows. If anyone breaches that front door, you aim for the center of their chest and you pull the trigger," Silas instructed, his tone shifting from protector to partner. "I'll handle the men outside." A booming voice echoed across the snowy clearing, cutting through the howling wind. "Montgomery, I know you're in there, you scarred freak." Caldwell's voice was dripping with arrogance. "Send the girl out. Hand over the deed she's carrying. And I might just let you freeze to death in peace. If you don't, we'll burn this shack to the ground, with both of you inside, just like I did to that pest house clinic of yours." Silas's eyes went dead and cold. The mention of his burned clinic, the fire that had taken his wife, snapped the last chain holding back his rage. He didn't answer with words. He kicked open the heavy oak door just enough to create a firing angle, raised the Winchester, and fired twice into the night. A scream of pain echoed from the tree line, followed by the frantic whinnying of a horse. The torchlight scattered as Caldwell's men dove for cover behind the snow-covered pines. "Kill him!" Caldwell shrieked from the safety of the rear. "Tear the place apart!" A hail of lead tore into the cabin. The deafening roar of gunfire filled the small space, tearing through books, shattering pottery, and filling the air with a sharp, acrid stench of sulfur and burning wood. Silas fired with methodical, deadly precision. He had lived on Blackwood Ridge for 5 years. He knew every rock, every shadow, and every sightline. 3 on the left flank. Silas called out over the din, working the lever of his rifle. Suddenly, a heavy thud hit the roof, then another. Abigail looked up, horrified, as the smell of kerosene wafted down through the wooden shingles. "They're throwing firebombs!" Abigail yelled over the gunfire. "They're trying to smoke us out," Silas growled, backing away from the door as the ceiling began to crackle and glow with an eerie orange light. "We can't stay in here." Before Silas could formulate an escape plan, a massive figure hurled himself through the shattered front window. It was one of Caldwell's hired thugs, a hulking brute gripping a Bowie knife. He landed heavily on the floorboards, his eyes locking onto Abigail. With a guttural roar, the man lunged at her. Abigail didn't scream. She raised the derringer with both hands, her grip steadying just as Silas had shown her, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The brute staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, dropping his knife before Silas spun around and delivered a crushing blow with the butt of his rifle, knocking the man unconscious. "Out the back!" Silas yelled, grabbing Abigail's hand. They burst through the rear door of the cabin just as the roof caved in behind them, sending a plume of sparks and roaring flames into the winter sky. The bitter cold hit them instantly, but the fire provided a chaotic, blinding backlight that obscured their escape into the thick timberline. "Spread out! They're making for the ridge!" Caldwell's voice commanded. Silas led Abigail up a steep, treacherous goat path, navigating the jagged rocks by memory. But the snow was deep, and Abigail's bad leg finally betrayed her. She stumbled, crying out as her knee twisted sharply. As Silas knelt to help her, a gunshot rang out from the darkness below. Silas grunted, a heavy, wet sound, and pitched forward into the snow. "Silas!" Abigail screamed, scrambling toward him. He was clutching his side. Dark, hot blood was already soaking through his heavy wool coat, steaming in the freezing air. The bullet had caught him just below the ribs. He tried to push himself up, but his arm collapsed under his weight. "Go!" Silas gasped, his breath pluming in the air. "Follow the creek. It leads to a cave." I'll hold them." "I am not leaving you," Abigail cried, her hands frantically pressing against his wound. Her mind raced, sifting through the medical journals she had spent weeks studying by the fire. The bleeding was arterial. It was fast and bright red. If she didn't stop it, he would bleed out in minutes. Footsteps crunched in the snow below them. Caldwell's men were closing in. Abigail tore the hem of her woolen skirt, creating a thick wad of fabric. She pressed it mercilessly into the wound. Silas let out a ragged breath, his teeth gritted in agony. "Apply pressure. Don't let up," Silas whispered, his eyes fluttering. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind a snow-draped boulder, a revolver leveled directly at them. It was Jebediah Higgins, her uncle. He was shivering, looking terrified, having been forced up the mountain by Caldwell to identify the girl. "Well, well," Jebediah sneered, his fear masked by cruel bravado. "Looks like the beast is finally put down. Step away from him, Abby. Mr. Caldwell just wants the paper. Give it to me. And he says he'll let you walk away." Abigail knelt in the bloody snow, her hands pressing down on the lifeblood of the only person who had ever shown her kindness. She looked up at the man who had starved her, beaten her, and sold her for a single coin. She didn't reach for the deed. With her right hand, still slick with Silas's blood, she snatched the derringer from the snow beside her knee and pointed it squarely at her uncle's chest. "The man who sold me is dead, Uncle," Abigail said, her voice dropping to a chilling, commanding register she didn't know she possessed. "If you take one more step, I will put a bullet through your miserable heart." Jebediah froze. He looked into his niece's eyes and realized, with a jolt of pure terror, that the broken, terrified girl was gone. The woman kneeling before him was forged in the fire of Blackwood Ridge, and she was entirely willing to kill him. Jebediah dropped his revolver and backed away, holding his hands up. "Crazy. You're as crazy as the beast." He turned and fled blindly back down the mountain, disappearing into the dark. "Abigail," Silas murmured, looking at her with a mixture of awe and fading strength. "Save your breath," she ordered, her hands finding the medical kit Silas always carried on his belt. She pulled out a small vial of carbolic acid and a roll of heavy gauze. "You taught me how to save a life, Doctor Montgomery. Now let me do my work." The morning sun broke over the jagged peaks of the Colorado Territory, casting a brilliant, blinding light across the snowfields. Down in the muddy main street of Oakhaven, townspeople gathered in hushed, nervous clusters. The distant, angry glow of the fire on Blackwood Ridge had kept them awake all night. Rumors like sparks in the wind the beast had finally gone mad. Caldwell had burned him out, and the worthless girl was surely dead in the snow. Then the murmurs died. Every head turned toward the mountain trail. Walking down the center of the road was a sight that would be etched into the history of Oakhaven forever. Leading the way was Abigail Preston. She walked with her head held high, her chin jutted forward, her threadbare dress stained with soot and dried blood. Beside her, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch but standing tall, was Silas Montgomery. His face was pale from blood loss, his midsection heavily bandaged, but his dark eyes burned with an unyielding intensity. And stumbling ahead of them, his hands bound tightly with heavy rope, was Bartholomew Caldwell. The wealthy baron was nursing a broken jaw, a parting gift from the butt of Silas's rifle when he had tried to ambush them at dawn. "Sheriff!" Abigail's voice rang out, clear and resonant, cutting through the stunned silence. Sheriff Miller stepped off the boardwalk, his hand resting nervously on his gun belt. "Now, hold on a minute here. Montgomery, you're a wanted man." Before Miller could draw his weapon, the loud clatter of a stagecoach pulling into the town square drew everyone's attention. Stepping down from the carriage was a man in a crisp wool suit, with a silver star pinned to his lapel, Federal Marshal Josiah Clayton. He had been riding a circuit through the mining camps, investigating rumors of claim jumping and corruption. "Nobody is shooting anybody," Marshal Clayton announced, stepping into the mud. He looked at the bruised, bloody trio. "Someone want to tell me why the richest man in the county is tied up like a Sunday roast?" Abigail stepped forward. She reached into her coat and produced the heavy parchment. "My name is Abigail Preston. That is the original, government-issued deed to the Silver Tear claim. Bartholomew Caldwell paid my uncle to traffic me into slavery to ensure I could never claim my rightful inheritance. Last night he led an armed mob to murder us and burn this deed." Marshal Clayton unfolded the heavy parchment, his eyes scanning the official federal seals. He looked up, his gaze hardening as it locked onto Caldwell. "Bartholomew Caldwell, you are under federal arrest. You'll be transported to Denver to face a judge." As the marshal dragged a sputtering Caldwell toward the jailhouse, the townspeople stared at Silas and Abigail in stunned reverence. They hadn't chased a monster up the mountain. They had chased away a hero. 6 months later, the spring thaw brought life back to the valley. The town of Oakhaven was forever changed. The Silver Tear mine, now legally operated by Abigail, paid fair wages, and the town prospered without Caldwell's cruelty. The biggest change stood at the end of Main Street. A hand-painted sign above a new cedar building read, "The Preston Montgomery Clinic." Inside the sunlit parlor, Silas stood near a gleaming medical cabinet. The wild beard was trimmed, revealing handsome, aristocratic features. He looked up as the door opened. Abigail walked in, wearing a deep green velvet dress. She moved smoothly, without a limp, the result of a corrective surgery Silas had meticulously performed. "You look tired, doctor," Abigail smiled, resting her hand on his chest. Silas caught her hand, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. The darkness that had haunted him for years was entirely gone. "I am exactly where I want to be," he murmured. "You brought me back to life, Abigail." She smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I'd say it was a fair trade. After all, you only paid $1 for mine. Thank you for reading this incredible story of resilience, justice, and unexpected love. If Abigail and Silas's journey from outcasts to heroes inspired you, please hit that like button, share this video with fellow story lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling Wild West tales. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Caldwell's fate.